In this video, we're going to take a look at what we call functions in context. So using the example in part A, you are cooking a roast in the oven. Let f of t represent the temperature of the roast after t minutes in the oven. This means that the domain or input values is the time in minutes, and the range or output values is the temperature of the roast in degrees Fahrenheit. In order to be safe to eat, the roast must cook to an internal temperature of 145 degrees. The following statements are written in function notation and represent the roast in the oven. Explain the meaning of each statement in relation to the roast cooking in the oven in everyday language. So I'm going to write out a few and leave a few for you to try. So number one says f of 0 equals 40. So you want to think about the setup. That is like f of t. So in other words, the t is equal to 0 and the output value is 40. So t equals 0. That means that time is 0. So what I could say in everyday language is after 0 minutes, or you could say at the start of cooking the roast, because that's also considered like 0 minutes, the temperature of the roast is 40 degrees. So there's a few ways you could say that. That's just the way that I'm going to write it out for this example. Number 2 says f of 30 equals 55. So it's set up very similar to number 1. So you want to think time is the 30. And then the output, which is the temperature of the roast, is the 55. Because that's what they described in the problem at the top. So remember, they said the range or the output is the temperature. So you can always refer back to the description and pick that out again if you get kind of lost. So let's write out after 30 minutes, or actually I'm going to change my wording. I'm going to say at 30 minutes, the temperature of the roast is 55 degrees. And I'm in fact going to go back up here and change this one too, because I think that's a better word. At 0 minutes, or the start of your cook time, the temperature of the roast was 40 degrees for number 1. All right, so those two look a lot like 3 and 4. So I'm going to leave those for you to try. But let's look down at number 5, which is set up just a little bit differently. It says f of 30 equals f of 51. So that just means that the output would be the same for those two times, because these are time, the 31 and the 30, and then it's saying the function is equal at that point. So we could say the temperature of the roast is equal or stayed the same. There's a couple ways you could say it. Is the same or equal at 30 and 31 minutes. Okay. Let's do one more of these at the top in part A. So I'm going to do number 6. It says f of 95, and then it has a less than sign, f of 110. So remember, this is time in minutes, and it's talking about the output in temperature. So we have to read it as a function of time, and the first one is less than the second one. So we could say the temperature of the roast, let me put the roast is, or wait a minute, let me put in at 95 minutes is less than the temperature of the roast at 110 minutes, which would make sense because it hasn't cooked as long. All right, so that's enough of my filling in part A. I want you to try to fill in the rest. Then part B, let's take a look at this example. It says you have a big final project due in your geography class. You know that the project is worth 150 points, and you will lose 15 points for every day you turn the project in late. The functions shown represent the points earned as a function of time in days since the project was due. So I like to jot down things they've told me, like t is time in days, and then f of t is like my final thing, which would be my grade. That's what's going to come out of the time I take. All right, to turn this thing in. Use the functions to answer these questions. So what is the domain in this situation? So that's always your input, which is like it sometimes looks like an X, but it can be different letters and mean different things, but it's in that parentheses right there. So that is going to be time in days, or you could just say days if you want. What's the range in this situation? That is going to be that output value, which would be the grade of the project. So what does f of 0 represent in this situation? So similar to the cooking problem at the top of the page, the 0 is time. So that means I have 0 days late that I'm turning in this project. So that means that would be my grade on the day it's due, or with no days late. You can say it a couple different ways. The grade on the day the project is due, and I'm just going to put in parentheses 0 days late. So what does F5 represent in this situation? Well, that's not good because that would be 5 days late. So that would be my grade if I turn in the project 5 days late. Not good. How many points will you receive on your project if you turn it in 6 days late? So I would need to calculate. My grade would start out at 100, but if I'm turning it in 6 days late, then that would be 6 times 15. So 6 times, or wait a minute, I take that back. This project was worth 150 points. Let me fix that. So 150 points minus 15 points for every 6 days. So that would be 150 minus 90 points, because 15 times 6 would give me 90. So I would only be able to earn up to a 60 if I did everything right, but I turn it in really late. If you want to receive any points for the project at all, how many days do you have to turn in your project, and how do you know? So in this case, you got to refer back to what you were given up here. And it says that you have, as long as time is greater than 7, that you, or no, if it doesn't exceed 7, we should say. So as long as it's not greater than 7, you won't get a 0. So you have 7 days to turn it in, but after that, your grade would be a 0. So when time is greater than 7, your grade would be a 0. So you wouldn't want it to be any more than those 6 days late, because that would be the maximum time you could turn it in and still get a grade of a 60. Okay, so that's it for this example.